The AirTag started chirping at 11:47 p.m., a clean, metallic trill like a bird trapped in a tin can. I was in the hallway between my bedroom and the kitchen, holding a glass of water that tasted faintly of copper, when my phone lit up with the kind of notification you don't expect to see at home. An unknown AirTag is moving with you. The apartment hummed with familiar noises, the fridge motor, the faint rattle of the baseboard heater, yet suddenly everything felt foreign, like I'd slipped into a staged version of my life. I set the glass down. The ring left a wet circle on the counter. I listened. There it was again. Chirp, chirp, chirp. A smart, smug sound. I followed it to my canvas tote hanging on the doorknob, the one I carried to the co-op for oat milk and too expensive berries. The chirp got louder when I lifted the strap. My palms went clammy against the rough fabric. I didn't find the tracker until I pressed along the bottom seam and felt a hard coin stitched under the lining. Not taped, sewn. Someone had taken my bag and needle-worked their way into my life. Outside, a steady Seattle rain finger-tapped the window, turning the streetlight into a golden blur. My building, an old 3-story walk-up in Capitol Hill, usually smells like old wood and curry from the neighbor 2 floors down. Tonight, it smelt like bleach and worry. I pulled the deadbolt, then the chain, and then pressed both hands to the door as if that could thicken it. My phone buzzed again, but it wasn't the tracker. It was the intercom, the harsh static filling my living room like the start of a storm. A voice came through, low, patient, a little breathy. "Elena, it's Mark from across the courtyard. You dropped something. Let me bring it up." My stomach hinged and didn't close. "Mark, apartment 2B. We traded nods in the laundry room, the kind of neighbor comfort you mistake for safety." He had the soft, placid smile of a man who's proud of knowing how to fix a leaky faucet. I had never given him the code to the front door. The intercom buzzed again. "Elena, you home?" The chirp chirped, cheerful and relentless. Rain kept time against the glass. I pictured Mark under the awning, his jacket dotted with water, one finger pressed to the call button, as if holding a promise. I slid my phone into my back pocket and stepped quietly toward the bathroom, where the lock is stronger and the window is just wide enough for a hand to wave a flashlight. I didn't answer him. He said my name once more, so softly I felt it more than I heard it. It fit into the hallway like a key. I didn't know yet how he had sewn himself into my bag, or my day, or the months before this moment. But I understood something that made my skin go cold. He didn't need me to buzz him in to be inside my life. The question was how long he'd been there and what else he'd left behind. If a chirp can sound like a countdown, what happens when it hits 0? 3 months earlier, the courtyard jasmine had just started to bloom, and my apartment smelled like a candle I could never quite blow out. I was 31, a copy editor for a small travel publisher in Soto. My life had edges I liked. The 7:10 bus that hissed like a tired dragon, the coffee from the corner cart that tasted a little like smoke, my apartment where the floors creaked in familiar sentences. I liked quiet. People mistake that for passivity. It's not. Quiet is an instrument, and I had learned how to play it. Seattle and I were on speaking terms. I ran before work along the wet lip of Volunteer Park, breath turning white in colder months, headphones low enough to hear the world, crows arguing, a distant siren, the slap of my shoes. I kept a list on my fridge called Things I Can Fix, mostly small domestic mercies. The sticky window latch, the wobble in the dining chair, a drawer that needed graphite. My ex, Ben, used to joke that I missed my era, that I should have been a watchmaker, head bent to gears, the world not allowed to rush me. I met Mark on a Saturday in late May, when the building's laundry machine ate a quarter and refused my socks. He stepped in with a roll of coins. his shirt sleeves pushed to his forearms, and I can help face, ready for use. He had the kind of body that goes unnoticed until it doesn't. Tall, broad-shouldered, an easy steadiness to the way he stood. If you told me to draw a textbook nice neighbor, I'd have drawn him. Warm brown eyes, neat hair, a little dimple that appeared when he pressed his lips together. Here. He shook a quarter into my palm. His hand was cool, dry. He smelled like cedar and laundry soap. Happens all the time, he said, and smiled. I'm Mark, 2B. Elena, 3A. Thank you. Anytime, he said, and it felt like a promise. One of those friendly neighborhood lines that means nothing until it does. After that, nods in the courtyard, a wave through the shared window well when I watered my basil, a good morning that made the hallway feel less like a gullet you'd have to pass through. If he lingered sometimes, I chalked it up to pandemic-era social muscles trying to relearn themselves. If he knew my name without my telling him twice, I decided I was flattered he'd remembered. If he noticed small things, my broken umbrella, the tote with Elliott Bay Book Company screen printed in flaking white, well, I noticed small things too. I keep lists because I grew up in a house where plans dissolved like paper and water. My mother loved soft starts and hard stops. We moved when the rent went up or a neighbor's music got too bold. I learned to watch from the edges. That makes you good at spotting patterns. It also makes you prone to explaining them away. Ben and I were done for nearly a year. He moved to Tacoma with a woman who liked hiking and breweries and not much silence. We were good ones. He laughed with his whole face. He called me steady. But he didn't know what to do with my need for quiet except try to fill it. After he left, I bought myself a small radio that hummed softly while I cooked, and an old-fashioned kind of company. I made soup on Sundays and froze it in neat stacks. I watered the basil. I got used to a particular shade of alone that didn't feel like loneliness. If you'd asked me what I feared then, I would have said earthquakes and late-night knocks. The city lists disaster kits on public websites like recipes. I built one with a hand-crank radio and iodine tablets and a clear plastic bin under my bed. Late-night knocks were rarer. When they came in my chest. Memories of men who didn't like the word no, of streets that narrowed when I decided not to smile. But my building felt okay. One couple with a toddler who wore dinosaur pajamas, a grad student who cooked curries that made the stairwell smell like cardamom, Mark with his quarter roll and willingness. July came in slow, a haze that made the skyline a smudge. On the 4th, the fireworks were more noised and spectacle. I watched from my window, AC unit rattling, the smell of fireworks like hot pennies and paper. Someone in 1C laughed too loud. In the window directly across the courtyard, I saw Mark's lamp, low, amber, like a lighthouse for a very small sea. He stood there at one point, glass in his hand, looking not at the sky, but in the general direction of our window wells. It shouldn't have made me self-conscious to close my curtains. It did anyway. It started to feel like he was everywhere the week after that. He showed up at the co-op just as I was weighing apricots. "Those are good this week," he said, as if we'd arranged to meet. He was behind me in line at the hardware store when I bought graphite for the sticky drawer. He was on the sidewalk when I turned the corner on a run, hands in pockets, that same helpful smile. None of those are crimes. City life is a game of overlap. I told myself that. At work, I edited a guidebook to Washington's coastal hikes, deleting adjectives like breathtaking and replacing them with details. Scent of salt, slick driftwood, the sound of gulls. Point to concrete things my job requires. I was good at it. The concrete things were small then. A neighbor, a quarter, a lamp across the courtyard. The shape of a man's attention, which at that point still looked like courtesy. I did not yet know how a shape can harden into a trap while you were still calling it a favor. How many times can you explain away coincidence before it starts explaining you? The note on my windshield was folded into a neat square, tucked under the wiper like a polite decision. Thursday, 6:08 p.m., gray band of marine layer low on the horizon. I stood there with my reusable grocery bag, pressing a damp line into my palm, and thought, this is exactly how TV starts trouble. It was light out. There were people. Somebody walked a golden retriever with a bandana that smelled like chlorine from a recent wash. The paper was thick, an expensive kind of stationery that made the creases feel formal. The handwriting was careful, the kind that practices straight lines in high school notebooks. Loved your blue dress today. You should wear it more often. I had worn a blue dress, cotton, pockets, under a cardigan at my desk. The office AC runs cold. I'd kept the sweater on. No one at work had seen the dress. I had taken it off only to change into leggings before my run. The note smelled faintly like the chemical lemon they use in my building's lobby. I put the paper back under the wiper and walked around the block twice. On the second lap, I noticed Mark bent over the raised bed in the courtyard, trimming mint. He glanced up as I passed. "Evening," he said, smiling like a man in a commercial for home insurance. "Evening," I said. My voice landed flat. That night, I took the blue dress out of the laundry basket and hung it in the back of my closet. I told myself to stop being a coward. I told myself a person can like a dress without making it a threat. 2 days later, another note. "You should try your hair down more. It looks softer that way." My hair had been in a ponytail on the run that morning. Down in my apartment while I drank coffee, up again the second I left. I checked the peephole before work, and the hallway looked like it always does. Dull brown carpet, exit sign with a burnt-out corner. I walked to the bus with my shoulders tightened like a shrug I couldn't finish. I screenshotted the notes and texted them to Tasha, my coworker who thinks in solutions, like some people think in recipes. Tasha, "Who knows about the blue dress?" Me, "No one. That's the point. I'm being dramatic, right?" Tasha, "No. Dramatic is starting a podcast about it. This is documentable. Start a file. Do you have cameras?" I didn't. My door is solid old wood with a deadbolt that sticks if you don't jiggle right. The building cameras in the lobby work when someone remembers to clean the lenses. I ordered a cheap doorbell camera that afternoon, my finger hovering over "buy now" like an apology. The package arrived on Tuesday, the cardboard damp from mist, smelling like tape and warehouse. I installed it that night with the tiny screwdriver that always slips from your grip at the worst second. When the blue light blinked, I felt both paranoid and relieved, like a person who puts a chair under a locked doorknob. The first footage was boring in the way safety should be. A swath of brown hallway, the neighbor from 3B dropping his keys and cursing under his breath, the small rush of vacuuming when maintenance cleaned the carpet on Wednesdays. And then Friday at 5:21 a.m., a figure paused in front of my door long enough to blend in with the frame. No face, just a jacket I had seen in the courtyard more than once. Navy with a ragged line on the sleeve that looked like a cat had taken exception. The camera captured his shoulders lifting and lowering like he was breathing deliberately, the way people breathe when they practice calm. He didn't try the knob. He didn't knock. He stood there a beat too long and then left. I watched it 6 times. The little chime when you open the app started to feel like a joke. I zoomed in until the pixels looked like tiny tiles, then zoomed out and swallowed hard. Tasha watched it at lunch over a salad that smelled like vinegar and onions. She said, "That's not nothing." I heard my fork clink against the plastic bowl. The sound made my teeth hurt. "Make sure you document," she said. "Tell your landlord. And do you have pepper spray?" I did not. I bought some. It sat on my entry table like a toy I didn't want to unwrap. I didn't tell my mother. She would hear the panic between words and help a plane with a suitcase full of casseroles. I didn't tell Ben. I didn't want to give him a ridge to rub down with helpful concern. I did tell myself that this would pass, like weather. I didn't yet understand that weather leaves marks too. The next time I saw Mark, he asked if my basil needed more sun. "You can move it to the south window in my place if you want. I'm home a lot," he smiled. The dimple made its cameo. "I'm okay," I said, and felt the basil droop behind me like a prop trying to deliver a warning line. What do you call it when the smallest things begin to feel like instructions you didn't agree to follow? The city's summer rain is a different creature than November's. In August, it arrives like an apology and leaves the air smelling rinsed. I started tasting metal on my tongue when I turned the key to my door. I started listening for my upstairs neighbor's footsteps, counting them out like reassurance. I started keeping my curtains drawn, even in the soft hour on Saturdays when light makes everything feel like a washed-out postcard. I saw Mark everywhere. The bus stop on Broadway, that loose line of people watching their reflections warp in the glass. He took a slow step back so we were mirror close, his breath a faint mint. "Mornings are the best," he said, like we were mid-conversation. "You run early, right?" I nodded because saying no didn't feel like a boundary anymore. It felt like a dare. He was in the co-op aisle when I reached for my favorite coffee, the one with the red bird on the bag and the smoky aftertaste. "Try the medium roast," he suggested, less acidic. I put the medium roast in my basket even though I liked the shock of the dark in my morning. When I brewed it, the kitchen smelled weaker. I poured it down the sink and felt ridiculous. He was outside the hardware store one evening when I went for a longer deadbolt. "You doing a project?" he asked. His jacket brushed my upper arm by accident or design. It was impossible to tell. The fabric was rough, spiky with wear. "I'm handy, can help." "I'm fine," I said. The word tasted defensive. He stepped aside, hands up, small smile. At home, I installed the stronger deadbolt. My screwdriver slipped, scraped my palm. The sting was quick and bright. I sucked the spot on instinct and tasted the iron of my own blood. The sound of a neighbor's TV laugh track leaked through the wall, then smoothed into the hiss of the radiator. The cheap doorbell camera caught 3 more hallway pauses that week. The person always faced my door, breathing like an exercise. It wasn't all him. The world tried to balance the scale. Tasha's voice messages telling me dumb jokes in the mornings, a woman on the bus in a yellow coat who told me my hair looked cool, a barista who remembered my name and wrote it with a little star. Then, on a Tuesday night, a tap on the window. Not the rhythmic pattern of rain, a deliberate human tap at an hour when only the streetlight keeps watch. I froze, my hand hovering over a pan in the sink, the dishwater cooling fast. The kitchen window faces the interior courtyard, 3 floors up, too high for anyone without a ladder or a reason. Tap, tap, tap. I turned off the light and stood with my back to the refrigerator. My skin went cold in patches. The only sound was the click of the compressor. I inched to the window and peeled the curtain back a finger's width. In the opposite window, the one with the amber lamp, Mark stood with his head cocked, like he was trying to set his ear to my wall. He held the phone up, the flashlight off, but the screen a low glow. His mouth moved. He tapped his own window, a tiny metronome I felt more than heard through the old brick. I let the curtain fall. I stood with my palm against the cool glass and thought about all the words for no that don't sound like an invitation. The next morning, there was a small brown bag outside my door, folded twice at the top. Inside, a plant cutting in a jar of water, roots like the Leckett white threads. On the bag, a note in careful handwriting, "For your basil's friend. Mint does well in kitchen windows." I left it in the hallway. 15 minutes later, it was gone. I started hearing a click from the hallway at random hours, the sound of a camera phone pretending not to know. I turned the volume on my doorbell camera up. Each motion alert vibrated in my pocket like a warning bell. The clips were 30 seconds of hallway and static. Sometimes the person's shoes squeaked against the cheap carpet, an intimate little secret of a sound. I kept a document on my desktop titled SeattleNotes.txt. Dates, times, what I saw, what I smelled, what I heard. It felt like homework for a class I hadn't enrolled in. The list grew. 8:19, 5:21 a.m. Pause at door. Navy jacket, frayed sleeve. 8:24, 11:06 p.m. Tap on window. Mark visible across courtyard. 8:28, 7:40 a.m. Bus stop. Comment about running. Mint breath. 9:02, 6:12 p.m. Note on windshield. Paper thick, lemon smell. 9:05, 1:14 a.m. Hallway footsteps. Stop at my door, no knock. On 9:07, the AirTag alert. The chirp like a bright little predator. I dug the tracker out with a seam ripper and a pair of tweezers, my hands steady in the way they are when I'm too scared to shake. The plastic felt smooth and smug between my fingers. I set it on the table and watched it as if it might confess. That's when the intercom buzzed. "Elena, it's Mark." The voice slid through the speaker like oil. I didn't answer. I called 911 instead. My voice came out even, like I was making a dinner reservation. I gave my address, I said the words stalker and neighbor, and I heard how they sounded together. Ugly, certain. The operator's voice was careful, professional. She told me to stay inside. She asked if the person had a weapon. I said I didn't know. I smelled the faint bleach of the bathroom cleaner I'd used that morning and thought about how homes punish you with the details you choose. I listened to the building's front door creak open. I listened to footsteps on stairs. I listened to my own breath discover new shapes. At what point does documenting become permission? The officer was younger than me and had the posture of someone told to take up more space. He stood in my living room with the rain clinging to his jacket and looked at the AirTag like it might sprout legs. His partner, a woman with gray hair tucked into a clean bun, walked the hallway and glanced at my doorbell camera. The apartment smelled like damped wool and the buttered toast I'd made for dinner and forgotten to eat. "We'll take the device," the young officer said, sliding the tracker into a small evidence bag. It made a delicate plastic sigh as it went in. "You said your neighbor identified himself at the intercom?" "He said his name," I said. "He said he had something I dropped." I told them about the notes, the window tap, the hallway pauses. I kept my voice even. I have learned that emotion makes you sound like a liar to people who think in checklists. The older officer's eyes were kind, in a way that didn't ask to be thanked. "Did you let him in before we arrived?" "No." "Good," she said, and wrote something down that made her pen scratch with authority. "We can file an incident report. If you want a protection order, the paper trail helps." I nodded. "Does this," I motioned to the AirTag, "count?" "It helps," she said again, a word that can sound like caution and permission both. After they left, I sat at my desk and typed King County Protection Order into my browser. The website was a pale blue that made me think of doctor's offices. I read the instructions twice. I made another list: steps, documents, screenshots, a timeline that started small and had grown teeth. My radiator hissed. Outside, a car splashed through a puddle and left a smell of wet asphalt in the air like a memory. The next morning, Tasha slid a coffee across my desk. Dark roast, the good one. Her bracelets clinked, a sound like tiny promises. "We'll go to the courthouse together. You don't have to be brave alone." "I know," I said. The coffee was hot enough to sting my tongue. I welcomed it. At lunch, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Elena?" a man asked. His voice had the particular bored warmth of someone paid to be polite. "This is Evan at Radiance Fitness. A gentleman named Mark stopped by to confirm your membership is active and to check your emergency contact." "I don't go there," I said. "Right," he said, confused. "He said he was your boyfriend." I hung up with a thank you that sounded shaky and pressed my palms to my desk until the edges dug in. I had given exactly one gym my number 3 years ago when Ben convinced me that punching bags were fun. I never went back. I had changed my number since then. If Mark knew it now, he learned it from a place that had it: my leasing application, my package labels, my work email signature. At 3:05 p.m., Ben texted. We hadn't spoken since he moved. "Ben." Weird cue. Did your neighbor stop by the shop? He works at a bike store on Pike. Why? Guy came in, said he was your fiancé, wanted to know if you still ride alone at Golden Gardens. I told him to leave. He bought a lock and left. Red Flag City, Lenny. The nickname made my chest ache, as if my ribs remembered being happy and wanted to audition for the part again. Me. Thank you. Please don't give him anything ever. Document it if he shows again. Ben. Done. Also, I'm serious. Get the order. I've got friends on SPD's bike patrol. They take stalking seriously. Send me the case number when you have it. The first twist wasn't that Mark was persistent. It was that he wore my name around the city like a key card, pressing it to doors he had no right to open. He was the kind of man who understands that claiming a relationship in public gives him a discount on doubt. That night, I saw him in the courtyard through a slit in the partings, head tilted, listening for something. The window glass felt cold against my knuckles. I wanted to pound it and didn't. I wanted to scream and didn't. I wrote down the time and date and the color of his jacket instead. On the following Monday morning, my building manager taped a notice by the mailboxes about respecting neighbors' privacy with the tone of a kindergarten teacher scolding for glue misuse. I recognized the clip art from a free website. I went into his office with my documents and my doorbell videos and the officer's card. He smelled like stale coffee and those pink glazed donuts that taste like childhood and regret. He palmed the papers like they might stain. We've never had a problem with Mark. He's polite, pays on time, helps me carry salt in winter. I don't care if he salts the steps with holy water. He's tracking me. He blinked slowly. We'll keep an eye out. When I got back upstairs, a single sprig of mint lay on my doormat, a small green joke that smelled like innocence if you didn't know who had placed it there. If someone rehearses your name enough times in public, how long until everyone else starts hearing it in his voice? The courthouse is not designed to make you feel brave. It smells like floor polish and anxiety. The fluorescent lights flatten everyone's faces. The security line hums like a hive. Tasha came with me on a Wednesday, her red lipstick a tiny act of rebellion against the beige. We sat on a metal bench while the clerk explained that the temporary protection order would be reviewed the same day, a permanent one later, and please attach any evidence. I clipped my screenshots and printouts to the packet with the binder clip that made a satisfying click. Evidence felt like thin armor, but it was what I had. When the judge read my sworn statement, she glanced up twice, at the word "sewn" and at the phrase "claimed he's my fiancé." Her glasses caught the overhead light and flashed white. She granted the temporary order, her voice even as a metronome. I walked out with a paper that said what I knew: stay 500 feet away, no contact, no following. Words on paper are both a line and a dare. The first day the order existed, the hallway was quiet. The second day, Mark's window across the courtyard stayed dark. The third day, the intercom buzzed twice at noon, but the voice on the other end said nothing, just breath. I held my phone screen up to the speaker so the recording app could catch the static. I said, "This is Elena. There is a protection order. Do not contact me." I sounded like an answering machine. That night, I slept with my sneakers by the bed and the flashlight on my nightstand. The AirTag chirp had been replaced by a new sound, the memory of it, a phantom ring. In the morning, I found a sticky note on my windshield that read, "I'm sorry you're scared." The "your" was spelled "your." Of course it was. I called the non-emergency number and gave the incident number I could now recite like a prayer. The officer on the line sighed in sympathy and told me to keep everything. "This is textbook," she said. "You're doing everything right." Doing everything right does not make your skin feel like your own. I changed my routes. I ran at different hours. I carried the pepper spray and practiced the thumb flick that would uncap it. My bag felt heavier on my shoulder, the strap cutting a familiar groove that now felt like a reminder. On my desk, the copy of the Coastal Hikes Guide ticked forward toward deadline. I read a line about sea spray and tasted salt that existed only in my mouth. On a Sunday morning, I went to the farmer's market. It's the kind of place that sits in your memory like a postcard. Tomatoes so red they look like lies. A stand that sells bread with crust like shattered glass. The smell of basil so green you think you can taste the line of it. I stood at a stall buying peaches when someone stepped into my space, too close to be an accident. Mark's voice materialized beyond my left shoulder. "You picked the wrong kind last time," he murmured, almost tender. "These bruise too easily." I didn't turn. My heart did that trapped bird thing, wings against ribs. The crowd swallowed us. I could smell his detergent, that same cedar, and underneath it, a trace of something medicinal. His breath touched the back of my neck. "Don't do this," he whispered. We were doing fine. I stepped forward and put my card into the reader with a hand that looked calm because I told it to. "You're violating a court order." I said, my voice louder than I meant, steadier than I felt. "Leave me alone." A woman at the next stall turned her head. The vendor looked up, alert. Mark slid sideways into the crowd and was simply gone, as if the market had eaten him. I stood there with a paper bag of peaches and the sudden fear that he could appear anywhere, like a sentence you thought you'd finish that keeps adding words. I filed another report. I sent another video. I told the building manager that if he allowed Mark on the property, he'd hear from my lawyer. A hollow threat, but it felt like a plank laid across the gap. The following week, I woke at 2:14 a.m. to the smell of cigarette smoke. My building is non-smoking. I got out of bed and padded to the window, feet finding the cool spots in the wood grains. In the courtyard, a small ember glowed and moved. A man sat on the low brick wall, face shadowed, cigarette tip flaring and dying like a firefly. He tilted his chin toward my window. I pulled the curtain shut and stepped back until the edge of my dresser dug into my hip. I called 911. The operator asked for a description. I said, "Dark jacket, same as always, frayed sleeve. He's outside the building. There is a protection order." My voice sounded like it was coming from the end of a hallway. By the time the patrol car swung by, its headlights making the courtyard into a stage, the cigarette was crushed. The ember was a smear on brick. The officers looked around. They didn't get out. The car idled 2 minutes and left. The smell of smoke lingered in the courtyard like the breath of somebody crouched behind a couch. That Sunday, I stayed at Tasha's. Her apartment smells like citrus and fabric softener and the faint powder of her makeup bags. A kind of girlish safety I didn't realize I missed. We drank tea that tasted like ginger and watched a dumb show about homeowners whose only problems were backsplash choices. At 11 p.m., her upstairs neighbor started vacuuming, which somehow comforted me. The whine of the machine, familiar and bossy. At 1:37 a.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert. My hallway camera caught a shadow at my door, then a gloved hand holding a phone, the lens reflecting the blue dot of the camera back at itself. He stood there 14 seconds and left. The video sound captured a breath, a soft, pleased exhale, like a man backing away from a painting he believes he's finished. I realized then that he never tried the knob, not once. He didn't need to. The pause was the point. The claim was the point. The proximity was the point. I printed a copy of the temporary order and taped it beside my peephole in a sheet protector like a teacher with laminated rules. I copied the case number on a bright index card and stuck it next to the intercom. I told the downstairs neighbor to call me if they saw anyone in the courtyard after midnight. I bought a portable door brace and shoved it under my apartment door each night. It squealed against the wood in a way that set my teeth on edge. I welcomed it. The night before the permanent order hearing, something in me dropped the pretense of normal. I stood in the shower while the water ran too hot and breathed in steam and thought about how you boil a person. slowly, while she keeps telling herself she's just taking a bath. I turned the water cold until my skin pulled tight. I watched it go pink, then pale. I stepped out and wrapped myself in a towel that smelled like eucalyptus and soap and swore to myself, to the mirror, to the tiny toothpaste speck constellation on the sink, that I would not be boiled. What do you choose when both options, staying or leaving, feel like surrender?
The morning of the hearing, Seattle did that theatrical gloom it does so well. Wet sky, glassy streets, a wind that lifts hair off your neck like a nosy aunt. I put on a black dress with sleeves and a blazer that made me look like I had a plan. I tucked my hair into a neat low bun because it made me feel like my head was a file folder closed with a clip. I wore boots with rubber soles that gripped the courthouse floor. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Tasha squeezed my hand. Her perfume, something bright, citrusy, sliced through the institutional air. We sat on a wooden bench that hummed faintly under us with building air. A bailiff read names. When Mark's name was read, he answered from the other side of the room with a voice so pleasant that I saw two people look up as if recalibrating. He had shaved. He wore a clean button-down. He stood straight the way helpful men do. It's a skill, that posture. It implies you always carry rope for other people's emergencies. He didn't look at me. That was a kindness I didn't trust. My choice had been made in the shower the night before, and again at the farmer's market, and again in the intercom buzzes at midnight. I would speak. I would not apologize for taking up space with my fear. I would say the words, "I am afraid," without adding, "but it's probably nothing." I would not undercut myself to sound likable. When the judge asked me to describe what had happened, I told her about the notes in the window tabs, the hallway pauses, the air tag that chirped like a laugh. I handed her the packet with the list and the screenshots and the still frames from the camera. My voice shook on sewn into my bag and steadied on claim to be my fiancé. I kept my eyes on the judge, and when Mark said misunderstanding, I said with as much calm as I could muster, "No, misunderstanding places a tracker in a woman's bag." The judge granted the order. 1 year, no contact, stay 500 feet away, surrender any firearms. The gavel didn't bang. This is not TV. The sound was paper against paper. A stamp thudding. It still felt like a bang inside my body. Outside the courtroom, Tasha hugged me. The hug felt like a scaffold, warm, supportive, temporary by design. "You did it," she said. I did something. My mouth tasted like tin. The courthouse smelt like victory, mute enough to still need translation. The choice is not the end. It is the plank you step onto over a river you don't want to fall into. You can still hear the water. What do you do with your victory when it still fits in a thin manila file? For 3 weeks after the order, the world pretended to cooperate. I slept. I bought a new basil plant because the old one had gone leggy and sad. I opened the curtains on Sunday morning and let the light make slow rectangles on my floor. I ran at the park in the rain, the pines smelled damp and sweet. I kept my phone on. The quiet felt earned. On a Thursday, I came home to find my rug skewed 5 degrees to the right. I'm not tidy in a magazine way, but I am precise about the things I see daily. The rug lives under my small coffee table, its corners aligned with the floorboards. It was wrong. Not dramatically, but wrong. My door showed no signs of tampering. The deadbolt and the chain and the door brace seemed to have done their part. Maybe my foot had nudged it that morning. Maybe I was being dramatic. I straightened it. I told myself to stop inventorying ghosts. 2 days later, the photo frames on my bookshelf sat in a slightly different order. The picture of Ben and me at the coast, left. The picture of my mother smiling with a paper cone of flies, right. It had always been the reverse. I don't have a great memory for dates, but I remember where I put things.
I stood there with a dish towel in my hand and felt the weight of the towel like an anchor I might need. I bought a tiny pack of sewing thread, the color of my carpet. I took a long chest hair from my hairbrush, one of life's indignities, and taped it over the crack at the bottom of the bedroom door so thinly you wouldn't see it unless you knew to look. I set a pea-sized dab of clear nail polish on the edge of the hall closet and door frame. I sprinkled a fine line of flour just inside the threshold on a night I didn't plan to leave. I woke to a clean line of shoe prints in the flour. One cross-hatch pattern like a brand I didn't recognize, size maybe 11. The hair on the bedroom door was snapped and hanging at half-mast, the ends stuck in a curl against the paint. The clear nail polish wore a tiny crescent nick where the door had touched it and first stuck. I didn't scream. I took photos. I emailed the detective assigned to my case and attached them, and I didn't give in to the urge to add a joke, because sometimes humor feels like stealing from yourself. I forwarded the email to myself at my work address, so the photos lived in more than one place. My phone buzzed a half hour later. Detective Rowland, voice husky with early coffee. "Don't go back in," she said. "We're outside." Outside? I hadn't called 911 yet. I looked through the peephole, the fish eye making the hallway wobble. A uniformed officer stood at the far end, profile against the exit sign's red block. Another officer waited behind him. I unlocked the door and the chain and pulled the brace with a squeal that made me wince. Inside, they took careful steps through my space. The younger officer pulled on blue shoe covers that whispered against his boots. He handed me a pair without looking up. The apartment smelled like my laundry detergent and the cold air that always creeps in around windows and old buildings. They dusted with a kit that produced black smudges where my clean white walls had been. They lifted prints and frowned at their phones. "Do you have a list of people with keys?" asked the older officer. I said me, the building manager, maintenance. I thought of the building manager's hands, soft and glazed donut sticky. I thought of Mark's jacket sleeves brushing my arm. I thought of how very easy it is for helpful to slip into entitled when you offer your own rules. "Change your locks," she said, "and the knob and the strike plate." "I have a deadbolt." "Add a second, and a camera inside pointed at the door," she said. I called a locksmith and pretended not to hear the disbelief in his silence when I asked him to come on a Sunday. He came. His van smelled like oil and cold metal. He held a tray of lock cylinders like a jeweler with rings. You don't want smart locks. Anything on Wi-Fi is a toy for the wrong person. You want metal and leverage. He put in a Medeco deadbolt that took his whole body to see. The metal sounded honest, the way a good door does when it closes. Deep, heavy, a promise that isn't exaggerating. He replaced the knob and the strike plate, added long screws that bit deep into the frame. He showed me how to flip a small arm on the inside that would jam the bolt even if someone had a key. You need a ram to break this, or a bad idea and a lot of time. That night I slept with the second bolt thrown and the arm flipped. My phone sat on my nightstand face down, but I didn't turn off alerts. My body held a pose I could feel in the morning, like a curled tightness, like a fist. On Monday, Detective Rowland called again. She said, "We got a hit on one of the prints." A grim satisfaction in her voice, like a teacher catching a cheater with the answer sheet. "Maintenance supervisor. Went through your place 6 months ago when the building did the annual smoke detector swap. He's on leave now. Guess who signed him in that day and rode along?" I didn't want to guess. "Mark," I said anyway. The name tasted like lint. "He's not on the log," she said. But the super said he had help that day. Friend from the building. He couldn't remember the name, just the tall guy who carried the ladder. I sat down because my knees decided to. The chair creaked. The air smelt like my coffee going cold. So there was a key, I said. There was a key, she said. We'll be talking to management about their logs. In the meantime, keep doing what you're doing. If he violates the order, call immediately. We'll try to get charges moving. The second twist wasn't simply that he had gotten into my apartment. It was that he'd used the building's own helpfulness to do it. The logbook, the smoke detector check, though we're just keeping you safe of maintenance. He had dressed in the uniform of people who belong and rode in on that elevator of presumed goodness. I put my basil on the kitchen counter and stared at it until the leaves blurred. Then I called my mother because I wanted a voice that sounded like home. I didn't tell her the worst of it. I told her enough. She said, I'm coming. And I said, don't. And she cried, quiet, because she knows how to be loud and she knows how to be surgical. Before we hung up, she said, I wish I could have made the world teach you in gentler days. I pressed the phone to my cheek. It was warm and dry and as helpless as all good intentions tend to be. That night, the smell of smoke returned. I stood at the window and watched the courtyard. No ember this time, just darkness holding its breath. If a man can borrow the city's manners to enter your life, what manners can you borrow back to show him out?
It happened on a Wednesday at 12:03 a.m., a time that doesn't belong to anyone but hospitals and night bakers. The rain had stopped. The city sounded like it was waiting. I had been asleep for an hour, the kind of sleep that isn't real rest, shallow, alert. The sound that woke me wasn't dramatic. It was a tiny chink, like a spoon hitting the side of a mug. I sat up. The apartment was an outline, dresser, chair, the line of light under the bedroom door, like a thin knife. I listened. The chink came again, followed by a slow, deliberate push. The door brace squealed as it slid, metal against wood. I had rehearsed this. I took the phone with hands that remembered the drill, tapped 911, whispered my address. He's at my door now. There's a protection order. I have cameras. The operator's questions came through the line like stepping stones. I stepped on each one. Yes, I'm inside the bedroom. Yes, I can barricade. No, I don't hear voices. Yes, I hear the door. I slid my dresser in front of the bedroom door like a chess move I had pre-played. The wood bit into the floor, a splintering sound. My breath had that paper bag pressure. I could smell dust and the lingering lavender of my pillowcase. The chink at the front door turned into a deeper noise, the heavy deadbolt thudding as it took each knock like a body. The metal arm I'd flipped hit the jamb and held. The brace stuck. The sound became frustrated, then careful again, then impatient. Through the thin seam at the bottom of the bedroom door, a light gleamed. Phone flashlight bouncing off the hallway wall. He moved from the front door to my windows, then back, the beam jittering. He was inside the apartment now. The new bolt had held, the old one hadn't. He had used a key or a tool, and he had gotten past one lock and not the other. My hallway camera buzzed my phone with a motion alert. I didn't look. The sound of my heart was too loud to compete with screens. The operator on the line said units are on their way. I could hear her typing, the clatter of the keyboard. I could hear her breathing too, the way she regulated it like a metronome for me to borrow. Stay on the line with me. I crouched, phone pressed to my ear, pepper spray in my other hand, my thumb finding the safety notch by feel. The carpet under my knees felt rough. I tried to listen for his breath through the door and could not separate it from my own. Wood cracked at the front. The old frame had a flaw I hadn't known about until this minute. A hairline split where the previous tenant once slammed mad. I heard it open around the lock with a sound like a complaint turning into a groan. The brace squealed and moved an inch and then held. Silence. I could smell him now, laundry detergent and something coppery, like a penny pressed to a tongue. He was on the other side of my bedroom door. The hallway camera sent another alert, a little cartoon bell chiming. The operator said they're turning onto your block. Please, I said without meaning to. It came out too soft. Please. He spoke for the first time then, low, not at the door, but to himself, and the sentence carried through the thin wood like a note through a wall. We're still okay, he said. We're still okay, Elena. Hearing my name in that exact tone, a tone I'd heard at the market, at the intercom, bent into soft shapes, did something steady to me. The fear hardened into anger, then cooled into a kind of calm. There is a court order. Leave my home. The hallway exploded with light and footsteps. The command voices, Seattle police, hit my door like a wave hits a pier, forced echo, then the hissed syllables of instruction. The operator in my ear said, "They're with him." I heard a thud, then the clatter of something falling, a phone, a flashlight. The smell of rain came in with the door open to the building hallway, fresh and cold. The voice that tried to sound helpful now sounded small and defensive, the way a child sounds when he gets caught with his hand in a jar. "Stay in the room," a voice called. The calm in it broke me a little. I cried then, quiet, the tears hot enough to make my cheeks sore. The dresser felt heavy against my palms, my knees ached. Pepper spray left a sharp scent in the air just from being open, the promise of it stinging my nose. After, they asked me to identify the items he'd brought. A small flat bar for prying, a pair of gloves, a phone with my building's intercom number on recent calls, and a folded copy of the temporary order in his pocket, like proof he'd done his homework. He didn't look at me. His face had dropped the helpfulness, or maybe the helpfulness had always been a mask that only fits if no one tries to pull it away. They walked him out, his shoulders not slumped, because men like him don't slouch, they pivot. The hallway smelled like wet wool and the metallic tang of adrenaline. A neighbor in a robe held a toddler who made small, confused sounds. The toddler's dinosaur pajama footy dangled. I watched the lights go down the stairwell, the radio chatter turning into distance. Detective Rowland's voice came later, measured. She said, "We're booking him on residential burglary in violation of a protection order. It won't be simple. These rarely are, but this is no longer paperwork. This is a crime scene." I nodded because nodding had become my language. I looked at the door, splintered where the frame had given. The brace had done its job. The second bolt had done its job. I leaned my forehead against the cool wall and felt for the first time in 2 months not safe, but seen. When the door holds and they take him away, what do you do with the space he leaves behind?
The building replaced my door. The new one smelled like raw wood and varnish and possibility. The locksmith came back and installed the bolt with slow, ceremonial care, his tools clacking like cutlery at a solemn meal. Management apologized in an email that overused the word unprecedented. I found a new apartment anyway, a second-floor place in a building with a real manager and cameras that worked and a courtyard that felt like a community rather than a trap. When I packed my books, I wiped dust off their tops and found my own hair woven into spiderwebs in the corners. I considered that metaphor and granted myself the indulgence of liking it. Mark pled to a lesser charge and agreed to a longer protection order. When the judge read the conditions, the stapler's thud felt like a punctuation mark I needed. He would be on probation. He would have to complete counseling. He would not come within 1,000 feet. Words on paper, yes, but words with teeth. I changed my routines where I wanted to, not where fear told me. I ran in the morning again. The air smelled like wet pine and coffee if I took the route by the bakery. I learned my new neighborhood sounds. Trash truck at 7:12, the upstairs neighbor's laugh at 8:30, the click of my own new lock like a note I could hum. I went to a class on boundary setting that made me roll my eyes at first, and then filled my notebook with verbs. State, repeat, leave. The instructor said, politeness is a tool, not a leash. I wrote that down and underlined it twice. I kept going to therapy. My therapist's office smells like tea and old paper. She has a cactus in the window with a tiny flower, ridiculous and perfect. She asked questions that felt like handholds. When did you first notice yourself minimizing? What does safety feel like in your body? Where does your voice go when you tell the truth? We practice saying no and letting silence sit like a chair nobody has to pull away. Tasha and I ate pie and watched terrible movies. She let me buy her a basil plant, which she promptly overwatered. We stood in her kitchen and laughed until I hiccuped. Ben sent me a message that said, proud of you, and I wrote back thanks and felt nothing twist. My mother visited and made soup and left notes in my cabinets like a scavenger hunt. Olive oil, salt, love. The city did what cities do, forgot me and absorbed me and held me in its pattern. I learned the faces on my new block, and they learned mine. The barista wrote my name with a star without being told. I smiled when I wanted and didn't when I didn't. I watered the basil and accepted that it would probably die and I would buy another, and that's not failure. It's a plant. In time, the AirTag sound left my ears. Sometimes when I lock my door at night, the metal catches in a way that sounds like reassurance. I take a breath and let it count as proof. How do you measure a life after a narrow escape? By what you lost or by what you put back exactly where it belongs? I used to think fear came dressed as a stranger in a dark alley. It can, but the fear that almost bowled me smiled in the laundry room and offered me a quarter. It spoke softly and learned my favorite coffee. It knocked on my life like a helpful neighbor, making sure my plant got sun. People warned me as a child to say please and thank you and not make a fuss. Nobody taught me how to say, your politeness does not cancel out my no. I know it now. I know it in my tongue and my throat and my hands. I know how to document without apologizing, how to ask for help without translating myself into someone more palatable. I know what sounds in my building mean normal and which mean pay attention. And I don't shame myself for drawing that line. There is a particular quiet at 6 a.m. in Seattle when the rain has washed the night's noise away and the first buses breathe out on their routes. I stand at my window and drink coffee that tastes like smoke again because I let myself buy the one I like. The city smells clean, the basil leans toward light. My door is shut. My door is mine. The story I'm telling myself now is not about how close I came to the worst version of a headline. It is about how I learned to call the shape of danger by its name, even when it wore my name back at me. It is about choosing to be loud in the right rooms. If quiet is an instrument, I know how to make it sing yes and no both, and I know which song is for me.
Tonight, I turned the lock and felt it settle, deep, certain, ordinary. I listened to that small, honest sound and decided to believe it.